Hi everybody, I'm Sycra, and today I have the honor of interviewing Andrew Probert. And if you don't know who this guy is, maybe you've seen the Star Trek Enterprise D. Maybe? Or the Cylons from the original Battlestar Galactica. Ever wonder who designed those? Was this guy. The guy I'm talking to, Andrew Probert, concept artist extraordinaire. And he's with me today for this interview. So, hi Andrew, thanks for taking the time out of your day. I'm sure you have a busy day ahead of you. I really appreciate this.
You're welcome.
So, I wanted to start in the beginning. Where did you grow up? Where were you born? And how did art first impact your life?
I was born in Independence, Missouri, a long time ago. And my folks moved to Kansas City, Missouri, shortly after that. As far as art, the earliest thing that I can remember actually doing is drawing spaceships, oddly enough. I remember my mom I didn't have any paper, so my mom had this dictionary with all these blank pages in the front and the back, you know how books do.
Right.
And so I decided to start using those as my drawing tablet.
Right.
My mom was thrilled about that, but I can still remember it. And it was a Flash Gordon spaceship because it looked like a lightning bolt with landing gear.
Right.
Windows. So I used to watch all that early stuff on television back in the day, and so that's how I came into the world, with a pencil in my hand, obviously.
Right. So did your mom have a lot of dictionaries, or did you graduate from
No,
dictionary?
she actually found me some paper real quick.
All right. Okay, so that's as a kid. Does art run in your family at all?
Well, not really. My dad, both my parents are gone. My dad was a musical instrument repairman. He used to live in New York City, and he repaired musical instruments for all the big bands of the era, the 30s and 40s. You know, Paul Whiteman, Benny Goodman, all those names that nobody today knows, basically. But he was on first name basis with a lot of these guys. Whenever they would come into town, he would work on their instruments. So it was very cool, and he could play anything that he could repair. So that would be any wind instrument, you know, from clarinet to saxophone to trumpet to anything like that. And but my mom was, you know, she bordered on being artistic. You know, in her later years, she would get into, you know, knitting and point stitching. I don't even remember what it's called now. But anyway, she would make these very nice paintings using you know, threads of different colors. She actually got into macrame painting. So yeah, I guess it was pretty. It was sort of a you know, below the surface kind of a thing for her. I went to school and just kept drawing. You know, eventually my folks split up and Mom remarried, and I remember doing all these spaceships, and my stepdad told me to stop doing that because I would never make money drawing spaceships.
Right. Yeah.
So
have you had the opportunity to rub that in his face?
No, because by the time I started hitting, he was declining as well. All of my parents, you know, my real parents and him were kind of the older age. So.
Right.
I never did get to rub it in.
But so that's as a child and growing up in school, you were doing these spaceships. But how did you actually make the transition then from this into the professional field of doing this?
Well, I took his advice actually, and started turning toward real world practical things, and I became very interested in industrial design, and so I went through my military service, and when I got out, I went to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California.
Wow, yeah.
And it's a very good school. I went through that and studied illustration as well as product design.
Right.
But interestingly enough, I'll segue into probably what's your next question, which is, how did I get into movies? And what actually happened was our car broke down and I couldn't go to school. Well, actually, let me backtrack. That was just about the time when Star Wars came out.
Right.
And I became enamored with the artwork of Ralph McQuarrie.
Right.
Like anybody who loves art and spaceships and all that cool stuff.
And he's the designer for Star Wars, and he designed a lot of the characters. And...
He did.
Right.
Yeah. George Lucas brought him in to sort of visualize what Star Wars would look like through George, and that helped him sell his project. Thank goodness. But a lot of these articles about Star Wars featured his artwork, and it was great stuff, one of the articles said that he was an LA-based artist, so I was compelled to call him. I looked him up in the phone book, and I called him, and while I was dialing the phone, I'm thinking, holy cow, I'm a geek coming in off the street. He doesn't know anything about me. I'm going to seem really stupid cold calling him like this, So he picks up the phone. He says, hello. I said, hello, I'm looking for Ralph McQuarrie, and this is he. I said, hi, I'm calling to interview you for my school newspaper.
Ah.
He said, yeah, what school is that? And I said, Art Center. And he says, oh, yeah, I went there for a little while. Come on over.
Wow.
Cool. So as it turned out, I did interview him, and the school actually did print the article. But that way we got to sort of know each other a little bit. And then going back to my story, my car did break down, and I wasn't able to finish that semester of school. So, I called Ralph up and I said, is there anything that you know of that's happening in town? I was in the LA area, and he says, I'm working on two projects. One is this thing called Star World, and one is this other thing called Buck Rogers. He says, I'll talk to them and see if they need anybody, who does what you do. So I got a call back, and he says, yeah, they're both looking for somebody. Well, the thing is that I love the work of Joe Johnston, especially a lot of his sketches, along with Ralph McQuarrie's, in Star Wars. So I found out that Star World was being done by the same company, which was Apogee, ILM/Apogee, their effects house. And I thought, wow, if I could get in and work with Joe Johnston, then I could maybe learn from him,
Right.
So I said, okay, that'll be the project I pick. And they sent me down there. Ralph sent me down there, and I showed him my portfolio, and they hired me to start drawing these helmets. And they were to be helmets on these creatures that were blind, so they needed a scanner in the helmets. And so I'm coming up with these designs, and they changed the name of the project from Star World to Battlestar Galactica.
Right.
And then they said, oh, by the way, now we need a full suit of armor with these to go along with these helmets. So I was designing all this stuff, and Joe was designing the same thing. We had kind of this friendly competition, going back and forth. I had taken I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting, reading the script, you see that the Cylons are chasing the Galactica toward this 13th colony, which is Earth. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if they had all been there before, or if they, no, let me back that up. So jumping ahead in the series, let's say that they make it to the 13th colony. Wouldn't it be interesting if the Colonials influenced Earth culture and the Cylons influenced Earth culture, the Colonials being influential in the Egyptian area and the Cylons being influential in the Greek area.
Right.
So I was designing my Cylon helmets to look like Greek warrior helmets, you know, with the top notch and the kind of look. And that's why I added the skirt and gave them swords and that kind of thing. And Joe Johnson was going more for a samurai warrior look, and you know, but sort of armored and very spaced out. And Glenn Larson brought one of his sons down to look at our drawings. I guess the kid was into science fiction along with his dad, so they talked about the drawings and they picked my design as the one that should be the Cylons. So that was very cool, and so then I started thinking of what would the you know, sort of in league with that, I was thinking, what would the colonial helmets look like? And I started doing Egyptian things. But when they picked my Cylon, I stayed with that. Joe took over the Colonials and came up with those beautiful colonial warrior helmets for the Vipers. So we each had a shot at doing something for those costumes.
Wow. That's great. Actually, before the movies, I wanted to talk a bit more about your time in school.
Sure.
Because I've heard, I don't know. You can let me know if this is the case or not. But from people who have graduated recently from Art Center, they're all talking about you get 2 to 4 hours of sleep. Was that your experience?
Oh yeah.
Wow. So it's
yeah. There's a ton of homework involved, and the funniest experience I can remember was I was married at the time. I met my wife when I got out of the service, and so I was married just actually before I went to Art Center. So I remember sitting there, and I was working on a project, one of my industrial design projects, and I was smoothing this model out, and I was sitting on the floor talking to her, you know, kind of cross-legged, sitting there with this thing in my lap. And I was talking to her, and I fell asleep in mid-sentence. She looked at me. I'm sitting there with this thing in my hand asleep, sitting up. So,
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, that was really wild. So it got to be to where I would go to bed with her at a normal bedtime, and then I would get up like at 4 in the morning, or you know, 2, 3, or 4 in the morning, depending on how much homework I had.
Right.
And I would work all the way up to breakfast. So that way, instead of taking my homework time, you know, right after dinner and not spending any time with her, I kind of reversed that so that we would have kind of a normal life. Then I would get up real early and finish my homework,
wow,
you know, for the morning. So, but yeah, either way, you get very little sleep at Art Center. And the funny thing is that when you have your semester breaks, you don't know what to do with yourself. You're so driven, you know, you're on this schedule. It's like, no, you can go to bed and sleep. It's like, oh, I can't sleep. You know, you're so used to the schedule that it takes a couple of days to actually wind down.
Right. Wow.
But you know, it was just all part of the education. I never regretted it. It was just something you did to be able to get that education.
Right, and it's because that's something that's really interesting to me, and I constantly see these great artists coming from this one school, Art Center, and it's just a case of I want to let people know that those guys work their butts off. I mean, you and it's not about just raw talent that you've had to learn all these things. So can you maybe briefly talk about some of the things that you do learn in Art Center that you didn't have prior to going in.
Well, one of the first things you learn how to do at Art Center is to open some very stubborn doors with your arms loaded with equipment. It's a very important thing because you've got your drawing board, you've got your toolbox and all kinds of other things that you're jockeying in two arms.
Right.
And then you have to push through a door that only opens one way. So you have to pull it toward you. I don't know why. I mean, they built this brand new school. I was there for the first year it was in operation, up on the hill above the Rose Bowl, and for some reason we were all mystified why they never had automatic doors, because all the kids, I was an older kid, but all of us students were struggling to try and get these doors open, and obviously if you were going through them, it became a habit to open them for these poor people trying to go the opposite direction.
Right.
So that was the first thing you would learn in school. The second thing, of course, was where the cafeteria was. But anyway, I don't remember. Our day was kind of broken up. We had artistic classes during the week, and then we had scholastic classes on a Saturday.
Okay.
So, our history and math or English or whatever the scholastics were that were required to get our degree was on a Saturday, but everything else was during the week, so at least one day you would have a shop, where you would build the models that you've been designing.
Wow.
And after each semester you would have your models on display. They had not an atrium, but they had like an entryway where you go. It's probably still there, and you can see student work that's all around. And some of the fun stuff, every year they would have kids make things that are 10 to 20 times normal size. So you would see these giant pencils or skate keys or enormous like wedding rings. All these things are made by some of the students, and they're wonderful.
Right.
And then one side there would be like illustration or environmental design or architecture or photography. So they had to have all these things up on display. So you would have a shop class, you would have whatever your electives was. I was product design, so my elective was illustration, so I would go to an illustration class, maybe a transportation design where you'd be doing cars and things, product design where you'd be doing hand mixers and drills and desk accessories and radios, that kind of thing. It's not fair of you to ask me this after all these years.
I'm sorry.
Because I don't actually remember. It's kind of a blur.
Right. Was there a lot of perspective, a lot of color theory,
Actually, there was a perspective class, and it's really funny because I understood perspective, and I got the class taught by Ted Yunkin, who has passed away, but he was very, very strict in his perspective class. And the cool thing was that I totally understood a lot of what he was teaching. So I ended up with an A+, which he never gives.
Wow.
And actually, yeah, so that kind of blew me away because I didn't expect it. But there was a perspective class. Seemed like there was a rendering class where you would do automotive rendering. Now, you got to understand, this was back in the day when there were no computers.
Right.
So we were drawing everything or painting everything. There was no computer class. There was no entertainment design class.
Right.
There was nothing to do with entertainment, which I think is now there.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, there were no computers. So the problem with that was that I went into movies right out of school. And then when I had it up to here with Hollywood, I tried to get back into industrial design, and by that time, everybody knew computers, and I didn't.
Oh, I see.
I mean, I had was in a Walt Disney Imagineer for 4 years, and I actually pioneered computers there at WDI in California, because they weren't using computers. They were building these exquisite models of all of their parks,
right?
But they weren't using computers, and I could feel the computer coming behind us. You know, it's like, yeah, it's coming, it's going to happen. So the first computer I used was one of those little Mac, those little things, you know, those desktop with a little 4-inch screen and the card slot thing all in one.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And I saw one in an office that was closed down, and I got the serial number, and I asked, you know, the support people, I says, is anybody using this computer? No, they're not here anymore. I said, well, can I have it? And I started learning on that. I started learning Mac 3D, which I don't think exists anymore. Then I went to Stratavision. Then I went to Form Z, and being rendered through electric image. And so I was learning that, I was teaching myself the computer while these guys were still drawing. And the odd thing was, we were doing a new Tomorrowland, and what I did was I built the buildings. They were very crude by today's standards. Of course, they were mostly blocks with some kind of form to it. But the reason I put them together was because I was exploring what it was we were designing, but in 3D.
Right.
You know, this was even before those modelers, those physical modelers were doing their magic. You know, and I was also putting stuff at a distance in my model so that I could determine what's called visual, oh, dang it, there's a word, visual intrusion, which means, like, if you're standing in Tomorrowland, you know, you don't want to see, you know, a cowboy riding by.
Right.
You want to see Frontierland. You want that blocked off so that you're in the world of Tomorrowland. So I brought my boss in to show him what I was doing on the computer, and the computer was here. Let's see, to him, he's sitting and he's looking. The computer was here. I was showing him stuff on the computer. My drawing board was over on this side, and I'm saying, so Tony, what do you think of this? And I turned around and looked at him. He was looking at the drawings on my drawing board. He wasn't even looking at the screen. He didn't get it.
Right.
Now, obviously, that's all changed.
Right.
But back in those days, this was late 80s. This was after I did Star Trek The Next Generation. So this was late 80s, early 90s.
Wow.
And they were just breaking into computers because of me and a couple of other people that were doing that kind of work, you know.
That's crazy that you taught yourself. I mean, wow.
Yeah, well, you know, it was very rudimentary in those days, you know. And the fact that we could even draw anything on the screen that was not just a vector line was just mind-blowing to us back then, you know. Right. This was just after Pong.
Right.
Okay, so
yeah. Wow. So I want to go back to your time in movies and TV, but you mentioned you left. Why did you leave Hollywood then?
The politics mostly. I'm not a political kind of guy, and that's all Hollywood is. So you know, and I never learned to play the game. I don't lie. So I mean, you know, here's the thing: if I'm working on a project, you know, and I hold up a drawing to somebody, to a coworker, and I say, "What do you think of this?"
Right.
I'm looking for another opinion. I'm looking to see, because it's very easy to fool yourself when you're drawing and say, yeah, that looks great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, so I'm looking for another opinion, and I want that person to tell me honestly, well, I think this is too big, or this sticks out too far, or that color looks kind of goofy, or or yeah, that looks good, keep going, or something.
Right.
All right.
Right.
So therefore, that's what I would expect. So therefore, if somebody asks me, what do I think? I'm going to give them the same kind of feedback.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not going to say, well, that's a pile of crap, but I'm going to say basically what I said.
Right.
If I think something is disproportionate, or the lighting could be better, or something, then I'll say so. If not, I'll say that I like it, but I'll tell them why. The most important word in working with somebody, working with me especially, is the word because.
Right. Right.
Because I don't want them to say, I don't like that. I want them to say, because it's too big, it's too pointed, it's too round, it's too tall, whatever. But I need to have a because in there.
Right. Right.
And the reverse is true. I would tell them, no, that doesn't work because it's like this, So Hollywood is not like that. I found out that when somebody asks you something in Hollywood, they're expecting you to tell them what they want to hear.
Right.
I'm not that kind of person.
Right. And that's not going to help them anyway.
No,
Right.
but it makes them feel good.
Right. I see.
So I just couldn't handle that. And so after about 10 years of Hollywood, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to design for the real world, in a sense? So I went to Walt Disney Imagineering.
Right.
And worked there for 4 years. They had one of their layoffs. They hire up a bunch of people and then they lay them off. So the projects I was working on was Disneyland Paris for quite a while.
Oh, okay.
I did some. They were going to put a water park in Long Beach, and we did work on that, and that disappeared. They were going to do a new Tomorrowland, and that got pushed back a while. So something I worked on, about the only thing that actually shows through is part of Disneyland Paris, and in their equivalent of Tomorrowland is Discoveryland. So some of the things that I came up with are evident in Discoveryland, but usually their projects last for 5 years. It's a 5-year development for almost everything that they come out with.
And then if they don't release that, then that's 5 years that you can't say that I worked on that, right?
Pretty much, yeah. It's pretty hard to show Disney work,
right?
Because they're very secretive. Something that was kind of fun though, when let's see, I'm trying to remember my chronology. I worked on the original Tron. That's very interesting. I can't remember when I was at the studio for a while, doing work there, doing some concept work. And I worked on the original Tron, doing some design work until Sid Mead came in, and so I was sort of out the door at that point. But he came up with stuff that I don't have a problem with that. He came up with stuff I could not come up with. He's one of my heroes, so that was good for the project. But while I was there, they wanted some kind of a little symbol to put on their scripts and on their T-shirts and so on. So what I came up with was Mickeytron, and they actually made a pin out of it. You can see that.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then later they actually came out with a vinyl figure.
That's cool.
How cool is that?
Yeah. Wow.
So if you go to my Facebook page, you can see my drawing for this character. And we weren't supposed to sign our drawings, but what I did was I snuck my initials into his belt buckle in my sketch, so you can see an AP in his belt buckle.
Awesome.
What the heck?
Cool. Okay, well, growing up, a big part of my childhood was the Next Generation, Star Trek Next Generation. And with Star Trek, for me, there's always this, I don't know, there's like two design senses going on, and I wanted to ask you about that because, especially in the original Star Trek, you've got, you know, cylinders and sticks sort of like jammed together to create this Enterprise, and then with the Next Generation, what I found was so cool was that the shapes were more organic. And you designed the Ferengi ship, right? And the Romulan ship, and that had a lot of curved lines. So I wanted to know, from that stiff design, what inspired you to the more, in my opinion, elegant designs?
First of all, thank you for your observation. The thing is that organic shapes are inherently stronger than geometric shapes. And one of my other favorite design heroes is Luigi Colani, who I think is living in Germany, but I'm not sure. But all of his designs are very organic.
Is he the guy who does like weird cars and weird vehicles?
Yeah, he does.
Okay.
The thing is, he designs everything.
Right.
And he's designed clothing. He's designed, you know, food utensils and dishes, glasses, buses, trucks, airplanes, cars. Yeah, he's unbelievable. He actually designed a pair of jeans with the stitching on the outside because it left the smooth inside
right
next to his.
Okay.
So his design thinking is really awesome, and so I was influenced very heavily by Mr. Kalani's work, and I started looking at what used to be called unibody construction in cars.
Right.
You know, it used to be where you would take a top of a car and weld it onto the body and that kind of a thing. But then they started actually creating these shapes that were all one form, and that became stronger. And so I thought, well, I could probably do that with the Enterprise. And I wanted to unify the shapes. You know, when I did the Cylon Centurion, what I did was I repeated shapes. If you look at it, it's got this kind of a snarl mouth with this gritting down between these snarls.
Right.
And if you look at the chest, it does the same thing. It comes down with these lines down between the kind of the rib cage.
Right.
So that's a repeated design, which gives it more of a unity. So I wanted to do that with the Enterprise, and looking at it from the front, you know, your observation is quite correct. You have kind of a saucer shape with a cylinder and a couple of sticks and even more cylinders.
Right.
And I thought, you know, visually, maybe I could unify that. So I came up with everything that was kind of an oval from the front.
Right.
In different forms of ovals, but nevertheless, that if you look at the engines and the saucer and the engineering hull, they're all oval shapes. And I tied them together, and I also lowered the warp engines between the engineering and saucer hulls. Right. Because I felt that was more of the center of mass of the starship. So that was my reasoning behind that. And a lot of people have problems with the size of the saucer in relation to the rest of the ship. And the thing is that the saucer is the primary hull. So I made it the primary shape and the primary size, which actually is an oval if you look at it from the top as well.
Right.
So that was sort of what the beginning of that idea was. And I'm going to get a piece of wire. I'm going to show you something interesting. I've got this cable here, which is just a normal cable. Yep. The funny thing is that when I was designing the Enterprise, I was sitting in Gene Roddenberry's outer office waiting to talk to him about something, and I was struggling with how the saucer actually fits onto the dorsal.
Right.
I wanted it to be organic, but I couldn't think of how to blend those two together. And this electrician walked through the office, and he had a piece of conduit, electrical conduit, which has got kind of a gooseneck thing. It's electrical conduit is a metal cylinder with bent joints all the way across it, so it's very flexible.
Right.
And he had a piece of conduit in his hand, and he was holding it like this. And I thought, that's the perfect shape for blending the saucer and the dorsal.
Yeah.
Because he was just walking through the office with this thing in his hand, and he turned around, and I looked up and I saw this thing, and it's like, holy cow, that's what I need to do. So isn't that weird how you get ideas like that sometimes?
Wow. Yeah.
So
awesome.
So that answers your question?
That's great. So you
a lot of people ask me, why are the windows so big? First of all, Bob Justman especially wanted a lot of windows on this Enterprise. My initial drawings did not have a lot of windows. It was more toward the motion picture Enterprise, which I also worked on. But they said they wanted a lot of windows. So I gave them a lot of windows, and I'm sure the ILM people are still talking about how they love that. But they're all very long, and people wonder, well, why are they so long? And the thing is that you have a hull. I've got this envelope here. You have a hull, like on the saucer, that's very angled, right? And people are standing under this hull, right?
Yeah.
And so the question is, where along this thing do you put a window so that people can see out? Do you put it like at a 5-foot level off the deck? Well, if so, what if there's a little person or somebody in a wheelchair? They can't see out the window. So I thought, well, if you make it go from ceiling to floor, everybody can see out the window.
Right.
So, therefore, you have this long window along the hull, and it works, on the underside as well,
Yeah.
So, therefore, the steeper the angle on the hull, the longer the windows are going to be.
Right.
That's why the windows on the dorsal are shorter, normal sized. And the ones on the saucer and engineering hull surfaces, because they're so oblique, are longer. So
So there's thought behind everything. It's not just, well, I'm going to put this because that looks cool.
Yeah, that's like the bridge. I didn't want to have any stairs in the bridge because I'm very aware of equal access. And again, if somebody, let's say you get somebody with a wheelchair, which in fact they had an episode with somebody in a wheelchair.
Right, yeah.
But let's say you get an alien that was like Jabba the Hutt, he can only slither along the floor. Well, he's not going to be able to handle stairs very well.
Right.
So I wanted to put in ramps. It's just, able-bodied people can walk upstairs easily enough, but I wanted to broaden the possibilities by providing ramps instead. Then I got to looking at the transporter, and that's up on a platform with a step. So I said, you know what? Why don't we say that step is really a lift, but it's positioned halfway up, so that able-bodied people can walk up it like a stairway.
Right.
But if you have somebody in a wheelchair or other situation where they can't handle stairs, then the lift would actually depress into the floor. You'd get on it, it'd go up to the platform, and you'd go rolling off. Herman Zimmerman, our production designer, took that to heart so tightly that he actually looked into drilling a hole in the stage floor to implement that. But it was too expensive, and he couldn't. So, when they had that officer come aboard the Enterprise in his wheelchair, they got him to the main deck in cuts.
Right.
Rather than show him actually how he got from one level to the next. But that's how he did it, was because the step is actually a lift. So, yeah.
So, did you have someone in your life that was in a wheelchair? Like, how'd you go about thinking in this way?
Well, it's just a matter of fairness, I think. And, you see, like people at Disneyland. I have been to Disneyland more times than I can remember, even before I was an Imagineer. And I would watch these people trying to get on and off rides when, and the ride operator would actually have to lift them out of their wheelchair and put them into a ride in front of everybody.
Right.
They were not set up for a handicapped crowd.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that's a small percentage. It's like, so what? You should be able to have at least one vehicle. That's part of why they closed that Skyway, was because they couldn't get handicapped on a Skyway. It's like, how stupid is that? That because they store them on a track that's off the main line, right?
Right.
So if they need to add more cars, they can just pull them onto the main line. Or if it's a slow day, they don't have as many cars, you see.
Yeah.
And at night, they store them all there anyway. So I'm thinking, well, why don't you have a handicap car that's open, and you bring that up, and you have a person, like if they're in a wheelchair, wheel onto this thing with clamps that would lock the wheels, and then just put that online,
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Well, it does to me,
yeah.
But no, I just saw it as a matter of fairness. No, nobody in my family is handicapped in any way. It's just something that I picked up on, and just out of matter of fairness, really.
So now, when you draw, do you still draw spaceships all the time, or what do you draw now?
Yeah, spaceships.
So that never left you. It's just.
Oh no. I'm hooked on the spaceship thing. I'm doing a project right now for an animation company in Brazil. In fact, we're going down there in a few weeks to a convention that they're having in Rio de Janeiro, and this company is coming out with, it's an animated series supposedly for kids. I'm hoping it'll have a broader audience than that. But it's a space adventure where some guy has his own spaceship, and he and his very small crew go out and do all kinds of fun things. So yeah, I'm designing the spaceship inside and out, and I'm doing their suits, and they're going to have like flying backpacks and enemy spaceships and all kinds of other fun stuff. So I'm doing a lot of design for that. Another company actually in France is talking to me about designing some robots for a project that they're doing. And another company in England, which I cannot disclose, is doing a project that that requires an alien and spaceship. So I'm still doing it.
That's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I always wondered, is there, because with, drawing and fundamentals, you can teach perspective, you can teach all the composition and color and all that. Is there a similar thing with design, that a different way of thinking perhaps to generate better design, better ideas?
I would hope so. I'll tell you what I do. Sometimes I've done a couple of talks at some universities, and what I like to do is the first thing, sort of my introductory piece, is I ask them to take 5 minutes and design me a chair. And after they come up with all these wonderful variations on chairs, this one case, I brought them up and there was an overhead projector, so I reviewed them all. And they were different kinds of chairs. So there were patio chairs and office chairs and lounge chairs and whatever. And so that taught me something that I wanted to share with them, and that was, when you talk to a client and they say, design this for me, your job as a designer is to ask them, how will it be used? So what somebody in the class should have done was say, okay, you want a chair, what kind of chair?
Right.
Where will the chair be used?
Right.
Will it be used in a patio? Will it be used in an office? Nobody asked me that. They just designed chairs.
Right.
So that's a lesson that I hope that they picked up on, is ask questions, because when you walk out of the door from that client meeting, you need to know everything that that client wants.
Right.
You can't go home and say, gee, they didn't tell me what material. Should it be leather? Should it be like burlap? I don't know what material. It's like, you need to get all the details.
Right.
Where will it be used?
And you can apply that to things that don't exist as well, like what you're talking about with the Enterprise Bridge and having it all. Yeah, because I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, that's cool. That's original. That's something you don't see. But then you're describing it completely from a practical, sort of functional point of view, and that's awesome to connect those two.
Well, the main point in that chair exercise that I give is one of perception. Because the students, as soon as you say something familiar, like a chair, they all imagine a chair, and then they try to give you a variation on what they already know.
Right.
You see. And so I tell them at the end of the exercise, what I tell you and what you should be hearing are two different things. Because I tell you, design me a chair. What you should be hearing is, design something on which to sit.
Right.
Now, that's kind of a fine distinction. But the thing is that if in their minds they go, okay, design something on which to sit, that broadens the possibilities.
Yeah, when I think
that
about
frees them of your standard chair. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It hopefully will blow the regular prototype chair that we all know out of their heads, and will give them a chance to shoot for a bigger, a broader look to what they're doing. So that's what they need to ask. It's like, design me an airplane. No, design me something that I can fly through the air on. Or in.
Yeah.
You see, and so hopefully that gives them a broader canvas for their imagination than an airplane. Well, an airplane has two wings and two tails and a thing. Yeah, no, free yourself up from that.
It totally works. I mean, even in my own head, when you say that, I just feel like there's walls in my head that disappear, and then everything opens up. And yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah.
Thanks so much for that great advice, and we're gonna wrap up. But just before that, how do people reach you? Do you have a website, a blog, a Facebook? Like, what's the best way to see Andrew Probert's work?
Well, you can either. I do have a Facebook page. It's. I have two Facebook pages. One is Andrew Probert. Mm-hmm. The other is A as in Andrew, G as in golly, Probert, A.G. Probert. I have a website, which is Andrew. That's my. Actually, that's my email address, but my website is probertdesigns.com.
Cool.
So.
And you have a YouTube page, and I will definitely include that in the description. So.
That's right.
I hope everyone checks this guy's work out, because he's amazing. And thank you again for taking the time out of your day to talk with me.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye.